talking to Dr. Greg Carey. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. We're going to talk about his latest book called Apocalyptic Literature in the New Testament by Greg Carey. So, thanks for being here. Do you want to tell us how this particular book came to fruition?
Sure. So I've been working on apocalyptic literature pretty much all my career, and over 20 years. And I was approached by Abingdon Press to provide the kind of book that would be a textbook for maybe an elective course on apocalyptic literature. And so that's what the book is. It's meant that college students or seminarians can read it and understand it. An informed layperson could read it and understand it. So that's the background for how the book came to be.
That makes sense, because you begin with a thought experiment, and that sort of acts like an introduction or a rundown of some basic terms. So I think you just answered my question about what audience you were targeting when you wrote that.
Yeah, I'm assuming a reader who's familiar with the Bible but might not be highly educated with the Bible. And so that's sort of a baseline that any new idea that I give, I have to introduce from the ground up.
What draws you to the apocalyptic side of the Bible?
I sort of fell into it. When I was a grad student, one of my professors encouraged me to write a paper for a seminar, just your ordinary seminar paper on the book of Revelation. And I was fascinated by that and decided to start thinking about writing my doctoral dissertation on Revelation, which is a big project. And to do that, I had to learn about ancient Jewish and Christian apocalyptic literature past Revelation, which I think a lot of people can graduate from seminary even and not know anything about all that literature that's outside the Old Testament and the New Testament. So I became fascinated. Well, who comes up with this sort of literature? To an outsider, it looks bizarre, right? Lots of symbols, lots of sort of poetic scenes, lots of strange language, intense language. Who comes up with that? Who reads it? How could it have been significant when it was produced? And for those of us who are interested in Daniel and Revelation and other apocalyptic parts of the New Testament, you need that broader context to understand what's going on there.
You mentioned Paul as an apocalyptic visionary. How do you see that?
One of the main themes of the book is that apocalyptic ideas run all the way through the New Testament, and that you can't just explain them away or take them out without taking away some of the really essential aspects of the New Testament. So with Paul, the one thing that is, two things, I guess, they come together for Paul that clearly show how invested he is in apocalyptic thinking is he believes in the resurrection and the return of Jesus. He believes God's raised Jesus from the dead and that Jesus is going to come back at the end of history to set the world right. And those are ideas that emerged, really, in the apocalyptic literature of ancient Judaism. You don't find them anywhere else. There's one other way that Paul shows a strong attachment to apocalyptic thinking. He talks about having his own revelatory experiences. In Galatians 1 and 2 Corinthians 12, he talks about his own, and he uses the Greek word, he talks about his own apocalypses. In 2 Corinthians, he said he had a vision. At first he says, he doesn't describe who it was, and then finally he makes it clear it's his own experience. He says, I visited the third heaven. And most of us don't sit around thinking about levels of heaven, right? But you find that idea in Jewish and Christian apocalypses.
A lot of people want to attach the end times just to Revelation. So you lay out this framework of interpretation. So rhetoric, poetry, and constructive theology. Could you give me a quick rundown of that? Because it's been a while since I've read it.
Well, what I can tell you is if you got that from the book, you read it really well. Because those are things I really want to communicate. So I think most people, when they hear of apocalyptic literature, they think one of two things. They think, oh, these are those crazy people who are predicting the end of the world, right? And so we don't like that. Or they think apocalyptic literature is so bizarre and so mysterious, I couldn't possibly read it and relate to it. And that also sort of causes you to push it off at arm's length. So I use this language. I say, apocalyptic literature is rhetoric, which means that it's designed to persuade people to behave in certain ways or believe in certain ways. It's trying to make a difference in the world. It's engaged. It's a different kind of rhetoric that we're used to, but it's rhetoric. I also say that it's poetry. Yes, there are a lot of symbols. There are a lot of dramatic scenes. And ancient readers and writers who worked with apocalyptic literature, I'm convinced they knew that. They knew not to take these symbols and ideas expressly, literally, but that they're ways of communicating something about the truth of the world. The word apocalypse in Greek really comes from the idea of unveiling. If you can imagine this, at a wedding, the bride pulls the veil away, an ancient wedding, which might be the first time her husband ever sees her face. Well, the apocalypses are unveiling that the world isn't what it looks like from the outside. So that's a certain kind of poetry. And then when I say constructive theology, I mean that the apocalypses are grappling with really big theological questions. And so they're creating new responses, new answers to these big theological questions through writing a story about a vision that someone's had. So what I'm trying to do with those categories, rhetoric, poetry, and constructive theology, is to say, there are ways in which we can relate to apocalyptic literature, even if it's not the kind of language that we're used to or familiar with.
Thanks, Dr. Greg Carey. Apocalyptic Literature in the New Testament, which is also call number BS 2545.E7, C36 2016. Available checkout in the library. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks.